We are a Bucks County museum. We want to tell the whole story. We don't want to just segment history to African American women's history. So that's my philosophy here at the museum. I am Shirley Lee Corsey, Executive Director of Gather Museum. We are headquartered here in the AME Church of Yardley. Yardley was founded in 1682 by William Yardley. William Yardley was a Quaker, and he came from England, just like our founder, William Penn. He also was allotted this property in Yardley. Back then, it was all part of Lower Makefield Township. In the early years, William Yardley came with his wife and 2 sons. 20 years later, they fell to various illnesses, and so his family early on passed away. His nephew, Thomas Yardley, came from England to settle the estate. And Thomas Yardley is the one that stayed in this area and built this into what Yardley Borough became. William Yardley, Y-E-A-R-D-L-E-Y, had an E. Then when his nephew came over, it became Y-A-R-D-L-E-Y. And then later, because of the railroad coming through in the 1800s, it became Yardleyville. And then our borough was founded. We kind of broke apart from the entire Lower Makefield Township. In 1895, Yardley became a borough. And we are listed in the National Register of Historic Places, along with this beautiful AME Church of Yardley. 3 years ago, I became the conservator, and we started really digging into the history of this church. And our earliest recollection is in the early 1800s, this property by then was parceled out from the Yardleys. It was less than an acre, and it was purchased by a group of AME congregants who came from Trent, New Jersey, right across the nearby Delaware River. They purchased the property from the Staplers. 60 years earlier, we found out that this property was a hay press barn in the early 1800s. So before this church was erected, it was a place of worship. And it's documented, these people were called the Free People's Church, and they worshiped in the barn. And then in 1817, they became a little more organized. It was the Colored Church, and we have the landmark cornerstones on our church. So this church in 1877 was built. And then from there, it was a very family-oriented congregation. And many were members here from the 1800s up until the last matriarch of the family passed away in the 1990s. So around the 1900s, this was a solid working class African American community. The church was established here, and another church, a Baptist church, was built in 1915. So this was the African American community, and many found work, including one of my aunts. She was a nanny for the Cadwalladers. Many women were the cooks. Many women started their own little businesses, little porch front stores. African Americans in this Yardley Borough have been the core of its production. Yardley Borough, as many places throughout Bucks County, because we're so close to main waterways going north, Yardley has many documented and speculated Underground Railroad sites. We even speculate that our property in its early days, as I spoke about when it was a hay press barn, freedom seekers found refuge here. And so we know our property was also an Underground Railroad link. Because I just want everyone to know, underground is just a terminology. Not everything was actually underground. Most places, it was the Quakers' allowing the freedom seekers who are escaping slavery to stay in barns during the day, and at night they would travel the waterways. So I'm happy to say Yardley Borough, which I'm a third generation resident, has wonderful Underground Railroad spots, starting with our property in the early 1800s. Along the historic Delaware Canal, there's another place called Aaron LaRue. It was a place of refuge. It was a hotel, and it's said that the canal boats would hide freedom seekers, and Aaron LaRue and his family would take them in during the day, give them food, and then they would be able to travel on north. We also have an Underground Railroad site along the other section of Canal Street. When they moved this house I guess it was around the early, maybe 1960s, they wanted to build a modern day Wawa. So this house that was built in the 1700s was moved. They found remnants that it was an underground hideaway. So that is another Underground Railroad spot that sits right along on the other section of Canal Street along the canal.
One of the prominent families here was the Dairy family. Who was Mary Dairy?
Yes, let me tell you about the Dairies. Now, you've heard about many of the prominent Yardley founders like the Yardleys, the Cadwalders, the Twinings, the Eastburns. Well, here, this was geographically the lower end of the village. We're south of Lettsworth Avenue. And in this area, originally it was called the Boatyard. So we have documentation that early on, African Americans were here with this church, with its history property from the early 1800s when it was a barn. 60 years later, it was built by the African congregants along with the Quakers who helped build this church. And so based on that history, we found out the Dairies, D-E-R-R-Y. There's a Mary Dairy. She's listed in the Lower Makefield Township. You know, this whole area was originally Lower Makefield Township. She's in the census when she passed away, 1860. She was born in 1790. So we trace the Dairies as the oldest known African Americans in Yardley Borough. We do believe there may be others because the Yardleys, when they came here, they did bring indentured servants, and they did bring enslaved people. We have their first names, but we don't know their last name. So our oldest known documented African Americans goes back to a Mary Dairy. And her lineage still lives in Yardley Borough today. There are 8 generations through the maternal side of the Dairies that still live in Yardley. So that makes them the longest unbroken lineage in Yardley Borough, African Americans. Now my family tree, I'm 3rd generation. My grandmother came here with her first husband at the turn of the century. And that was part of the Great Migration. I can tell you about that. Many African Americans started coming to Yardley Borough and Bucks County, and they found work here. In the early 1900s, my family, going back to my grandmother's first husband, and many that lived on this street, starting with many African Americans found work. They helped with the railroad. The New York, Pennsylvania Railroad Company built the railroad that still exists here. It's a train stop here in Yardley in the late 1800s. We have row houses that were built by Eastburn. He's another prominent Quaker from Yardley. He built the row homes that still exist today, and it's said that the Irish immigrants, the workers who helped build the railroad, they stayed here. My family came here in the turn of the century, and many others, they found work. Let me tell you about a gentleman who lived on this street, Mr. Briscoe. We will call him Mr. Britt. He worked up at the duck farm. By the early 1900s, the original property of William Yardley was sold, and it became McCormick Duck Farm. And Yardley was known during that time. They were the finest ducks throughout the nation. So many African-American men and women worked there. Well, Mr. Britt was their highly producing duck slaughterer. The boss loved him. They said Mr. McCormick just loved the way he worked. Well, one day, Mr. Britt had a toothache, and he could not let Mr. Britt leave. So he called in a dentist, and the dentist pulled his tooth while he was on break, and within an hour, they said Mr. Britt was back to work. So this is just a little example of the African Americans who were part of this community. During the 1950s and 60s, it was very entrepreneurial, very spiritual. Many found work with the steel mill. Many women had their own storefront stores. Mrs. Bussey on South Battle Avenue, you could go there and get a lunch. Mrs. Elam had her own little snack store. So here in this area of Yardley Borough, working, very spiritual African Americans who were the foundation of the everyday life of Yardley Borough.
So let's move then into the 1970s and 80s. How did the community change?
I would say now I was here, my whole family across the street. Mom and Dad purchased our home here in 1958. We all went through the Pennsbury School District. We would walk uptown. Our school was Yardley Elementary. Previous to that, it was the school that went all the way up to high school and college. So when I was a little girl, my brothers and sisters, it was Yardley Elementary School. And we would walk daily to the school. Yardley is known as a walking town. By then, there were 3 African-American churches. AME Church of Yardley was the first, 1915 First Baptist Church, and then in the 50s and 60s, a gentleman and several African-Americans purchased property on Pennsylvania Avenue and built the Community Baptist Church. So in this little area is a very spiritual town, and I believe that's why the culture of Yardley is still that way, a very family-oriented, very supportive community. By the 1980s, Helene Derry Giles knew she needed to preserve this church. It was dwindled down. So she wrote an application to the Bucks County Historical Association and received a heritage application plaque. And that's what the top plaque is at the top of the church. 1982, because of her, that was the first documented to make sure this was a historical landmark in Bucks County. Well, fast forward to 2022. Me being a resident here, it hadn't been an active church in over 20 years. I saw it falling apart. I knew I had to do something. With the help of my neighborhood, my brother Michael Lee, and my sister-in-law Marlene, we literally saved the church. But I petitioned the court, I became the conservator. So then it opened up a lot of information about the church. Many historians read about what I was doing. So I got visited by Jeffrey Marshall and many others who were so happy, including here in Yardley Borough. I'm a member of the Yardley Historical Association. The president, Susan Taylor, stepped right up, wrote me a beautiful letter in support of what I was doing. After I petitioned the court, I'll never forget, at the Bucks County Common Pleas, my attorney and I, and supportive family members, my brother Michael, Susan Taylor, Yardley Historical Association, and many other supporters, they were there with me. And it was not a problem. I became the conservator, my name added to the deed. And so after that, based on legal advice I received, we found out that the good news about this church, it never changed hands. On the original deed, it still had the original trustees. And so my advice was, let's leave it as AME Church. No encumbrances, no taxes were due. And thank God, I believe it was just my time, my destiny to step in and rescue the church along with my family and friends, because I think it was destined for maybe a parking lot. So I was so happy that I was able, being from this community and dwindling down to less than a dozen African-American families in Yardley Borough. I'm so happy I was able to be a part of rescuing the church, being a conservator, and I had a grand opening. The whole community helped. My brother got a dumpster and we dusted the place out. My first grant was under the direction of Senator Santaserio. I had a grand opening, we dusted it out. It didn't look anything as nice as it is now, but the bone structure was there. I saw the vision of rehabbing this church because I knew it's a living legacy. So after many folks came by and we put the word out, and through Senator Santaserio, after I founded my nonprofit, the advice of my attorney was, establish your Pennsylvania nonprofit, Gather Museum. That led me to get grants. Through the direction and under making sure I submitted all my paperwork, I was able to get my first grant through the Pennsylvania Department of Economic Development. And that was a $50,000 grant that allowed me to rehab the roof. My brother found an old contractor who knew how to preserve lime plaster walls. Our goal was to keep it as much intact as possible, and it's amazing. This is such a well-built building. It's also listed in the National Register of Historic Places. What an honor to be from this community, having the support of my family and my community, and now it's Gather Place Museum, and we bring history to life. We have photos of what Helene Derry Giles accomplished. I was able to meet and reach out to Jeffrey Marshall in 2022. He was still the director of the Bucks County Conservancy, and he sent me the original photos that Helene Derry Giles took in 1982. I enlarged those photos. So you'll see in the formerly choir area photos, and that's our homage and historic preservation of when this was still an active church. So that's what they'll see when they visit. And then to keep us going, we have programs. We tell the story of Harriet Tubman. We tell the story of the women's suffrage movement. We tell local history, how we're environmentally a part of Lock 5 and the Delaware Canal system. About a year and a half ago, through advice from my brother Michael, I found out about America 250 PA, the state-level initiative for celebrating 2026. They had a program called Nonprofit Affiliate, and I filled out the application, and that allowed me to be connected statewide, so people throughout the state know about Gather Place. Then, about a year ago, they invited folks to apply for the Semi-Quin grants. That was last fall. Again, I believe in networking and making sure I'm in touch with not only my community here in Yardley, but throughout Bucks County and our state. I applied for the first round of the Semi-Quin grant. Lo and behold, I was one of 3 Bucks County nonprofits to receive the grant. And my grant title that I proposed was basically, if I had funding, I could increase what I've been doing for the past 3 years. I could expand the story of African Americans, women, local history, our environment, tours along the canal, tours about the Underground Railroad in Yardley and throughout Bucks County. So I received the grant, and I had a kickoff in April at the Yardley Friends Meeting House. Since then, we've been developing our program, and we're ready to launch it. It's called History Hunt for Me, and it's under my realm of celebrating America's 250 years of resilience. As Abigail Adams said, remember the ladies. I want to make sure, as we're talking about America's history, not only do we have to include the African American story, I want to make sure that we remember the ladies. We have a wonderful program called From Martha to Michelle, and we celebrate 12 influential First Ladies of the United States, starting with our First Lady, Martha Washington, to our first African American First Lady, Michelle Obama. We have a fun program called the Harlem Renaissance. So we're going to celebrate the cultural explosion of African American that happened in the 1920s. We also have a module, the Civil Rights Movement. And of course, we're going to cover Dr. Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Fannie Lou Hamer. America's 250 years of resilience in pursuit of liberty, justice, and equality. And I repeat, in pursuit of liberty, justice, and equality, because I realize we're still in pursuit of those things. But many things have happened throughout our history. I've been warmly supported by my family, by my community, to save this landmark, because it's so important, because of gentrification and much of our history being erased. Sometimes it just takes one person to step up, and with the support of my family, my community, and now my state, I'm happy to say it's being preserved, celebrated, and we invite community engagement to keep it going.